Hello, good evening, welcome to Novara Live. My name is Bastani. I hope you're well. I'm filling in for the indisputably outstanding Michael Walker, just as a one-off on this Friday evening. And rather than me being down the line as the co-host, I'm joined by Kieran and Andrieu. Kieran, how are we?
Yeah, doing well, Aaron. I don't often get invited on a Friday, and it's quite exciting. It feels like anything could happen.
I'm not quite that bad, but, quite a lot can happen. Anything, I'm not so sure, but, keep your eyes peeled. Coming up tonight, Rachel Reeves appears to blame Donald Trump for the UK's economic woes. Giftgate, yes, Giftgate rears its head again. And James O'Brien calls a caller anti-Semitic for questioning the firing of his former colleague, Sangita Myska, from RBC. Ukraine has agreed the terms of a temporary ceasefire in the country's war with Russia. Brokered by the US at a meeting in Saudi Arabia, the deal would see the two sides lay down their arms for 30 days. Last night, US President Donald Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, flew to Moscow where he met with Putin. Afterwards, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov told reporters there was reason to feel, quote, cautious optimism about a negotiated and permanent end to the war. And Donald Trump has called the meeting good and productive, but the optimism seems to be at odds with previous signals from the Russian president. The late-night meeting followed a press conference given by Putin in Moscow on Thursday, where he gave his views on the 30-day truce proposal.
We agree with the proposal for a ceasefire, to cease hostilities, but we proceed from the fact that this ceasefire should lead to an enduring peace and should remove the root causes of this crisis.
A pretty ambivalent answer there, carefully crafted not to be an outright rejection of the US proposal, while also promising to bog it down in potentially lengthy negotiations. And Zelenskyy has warned that Putin will do precisely that. Of course, Putin is afraid to tell President Trump directly that he wants to continue his war and keep killing Ukrainians. That's why in Moscow they're surrounding the ceasefire idea with such preconditions that it either fails or gets dragged out for so long as possible. Putin does this often. He doesn't say no outright, but he drags things out and makes no reasonable solutions possible. We see this as yet another round of Russian manipulation. Rather than a temporary truce, Putin had his eye on the main prize, military gains, which are sufficient, in his eyes anyway, to end the war. But as he mentioned in that clip, any lasting peace would have to be on terms that eliminate what he called the root causes of the crisis. Basically, we want to see peace, but we want to see it on our terms and absolutely nobody else's, meaning we're not going to invade again. I'm guessing that's quite a lot of Ukraine. According to Reuters, the US already knows the terms that Putin favors. The news agency has reported that Russia has presented US officials with a list of demands to end the war in Ukraine and improve relations with Washington. We don't know exactly what those demands are, but last night, Donald Trump's national security advisor, Mike Waltz, gave Fox News a clue.
If I were to imagine how this deal unfolds, it's going to be the rare earth mineral deal, a component that keeps U.S. involvement and a presence in Ukraine. Maybe European troops can be in Ukraine as well. I would imagine that Ukraine being a part of NATO is not going to happen, and I would imagine parts, maybe the Donbass region in particular, or areas that are heavily populated by people from Russia, that would go to Putin in any negotiated settlement. Am I wrong in my conjecture here?
Sean, no surprise, you're not wrong in any of that. And what's important is that we are discussing all of those things with both sides. We are having those discussions with our counterparts with the Russians. We are having those discussions with our counterparts with the Ukrainians. And we are pushing both sides together with President Trump, the deal maker in chief.
I'm sure Trump likes that label, the deal maker in chief. The US has already said that Ukraine won't be part of NATO, and giving up territory will be a difficult concession for Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelenskyy to accept. However, he's rapidly losing one of his chief bargaining chips when it comes to land. These maps show the progress of Ukraine's territorial gains inside Russia's Kursk region. That's on the Russia-Ukraine border. In August last year, Ukrainian forces had managed to occupy a significant area of that land. Repeat, that is Russian territory. But over the last few months, Russia has taken almost all of it back. The Ukrainian retreat has come at a heavy cost for the country's military. A source inside the Ukrainian army who recently left the Kursk region told the Guardian newspaper this: "It's over. The only question now is managing the withdrawal with as few losses as possible." Earlier today, Donald Trump used Truth Social, his social media platform, to paint a vivid picture of just how bad things are in Kursk for Ukrainian soldiers. He said this: "We had a very good and productive discussions with President Vladimir Putin of Russia yesterday, and there is a very good chance this horrible, bloody war can finally come to an end. But at this very moment, thousands of Ukrainian troops are completely surrounded by the Russian military and in a very bad and vulnerable position. I've strongly requested to President Putin that their lives be spared. This would be a horrible massacre, one not seen since World War II. God bless them all." That's interesting because, of course, if those people do proceed to die, Trump can use that as a weapon, I suppose, against Putin, right? He can say, you've committed a massacre. He's predicted a massacre. And of course, if tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers now proceed to die in Kursk, it's a massacre, the worst since World War II. Those are the words of Donald Trump, not a Ukrainian press release. Ukraine denies that its soldiers are presently encircled, and the White House later clarified that Trump had not spoken to Putin. You can draw your own conclusions about what actually happened. In initial discussions with the US, Zelenskyy had suggested swapping Ukrainian-held territory in Kursk for Russian-held territory in Ukraine. Russia dismissed that offer at the time, presumably well aware of the turning tide. There's also one of the reasons Putin gave for hesitating over a 30-day pause in the fighting. According to him, Russia is making progress in their campaign and doesn't need the break, whereas he accused Ukraine of needing it to regroup and increase their mobilization efforts. Ukraine's losses in Kursk and Russia's sense that their enemy is weakening means Putin is under no local pressure to end the war. But pressure might be forthcoming from the US. Speaking at the White House on Thursday evening, Trump sounded optimistic.
We know where we are with Ukraine, and we are getting good signals outside of Russia as to where we are with Russia. And hopefully they'll do the right thing. It's really humanity. We're talking about humanity. We're not talking about the money. But then you add the money to it, and hundreds of billions of dollars is being spent and really wasted so unnecessarily. It should have never happened.
Behind the scenes, though, Trump is reported to be losing his patience with Putin. The Washington Post reports that the president is planning a new raft of sanctions to force Russia's hand. Last night, new restrictions on Russian banks came into force, making it harder for other countries to buy Russian oil and gas using the US banking system. Of course, that's many countries, and most of them hold dollars. Recent news from the intelligence community is also unlikely to improve Trump's mood, with the Washington Post reporting this. A European intelligence official, citing intelligence gathered within the past month, said officials in Moscow believe that Trump is weak, lacks a core set of principles, and may be open to manipulation. Kieran, one can choose to believe that or not. That may be a rather obstreperous European official just saying something to be critical of the president. But it's interesting that that's being briefed to a US outlet by a European right now. What are your thoughts on that and on this story more broadly?
Well, I mean, first of all, first thing I want to say is, does Ukraine really want to be in NATO? I mean, it seems to me that the value of the NATO security bond is at an all-time low. You just had to see today the exchange between Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, and President of the United States. The Secretary General simpering, pussyfooting around Trump as he openly and nakedly expresses imperial ambitions effectively in two sovereign NATO member states, Canada and Greenland, by extension Denmark. So you add to that also that Putin will have legitimate concerns about NATO being on Russia's border and will also use it dishonestly as a pretext. And I really have to wonder whether Zelenskyy wants Ukraine to be in NATO at this point. And if he does, I would strongly militate for the counter position. As for the Europeans, I mean, look, what I'll say, Aaron, is this, and it's a bad thing to say, and I apologize in advance, but I say it because I think it's true. This has been a very, very good war for Vladimir Putin, right? He's further tightened his grip on power within the ruling structures of the Russian state. Any elite competitors to power have been bested and consigned to obscurity or, of course, killed, much worse, killed. Popularity among the Russian masses spiked with the invasion in 2021, and it's held pretty consistently. I mean, it's difficult to get, obviously, accurate polling on the Russian, Russian population, Russian public opinion, and so on. But relatively credible sources, almost all relatively credible sources, suggest his popularity among the Russian masses has remained high since the 2021 illegal invasion, right? And then, of course, there's the territorial gains. There's the territorial gains, which talked about many, many times in the show. And of course, the ambit of which, the full extent of which are yet to be determined. But clearly, on all of those indicators, this has been a very good war for Vladimir Putin. That means that he's not in a rush to end things immediately because, of course, with the passing of the war, and its kind of irredentist claims, irredentism being the idea that you can claim territory, someone else's sovereign territory on the basis of your own history or of demographic change in those areas, etc. Excuse me. With the passing of the war and those irredentist claims, so too the obvious benefits to him and his cult of power pass away, right? Two cohorts, I just quickly end by saying two cohorts, I think it bears mention that this has not been a good war for, are the ordinary people of Russia and Ukraine, right? And particularly combatant soldiers. Leaked Ukrainian intelligence and credible Russian sources both suggest that both sides have been significantly underplaying the number of war dead in this terrible, terrible protracted war. Where it goes from here, I don't know.
Your point about it being a good war for Putin is, I think, entirely correct. It's fair to say that he isn't sensitive to the loss of domestic life with regards to the war effort. Huge numbers of principally men have died. Combatants have died on both sides, men and women, though, of course, particularly in the case of Ukraine. Huge numbers of people have died, but that obviously doesn't mean so much to him. On top of all the things you just relayed there about gaining land, greater political capital, various political rivals have either died or been bumped off. You had the leader of the Wagner group. Of course, Navalny's out of the picture too. There is also the fact that Russia's economy has in no way suffered from these sanctions. If you look at GDP by PPP, not nominal GDP measured in US dollars, but measured in the domestic economy and the currency of its choice and what that currency can buy domestically. And of course, if you're running a war economy, all of Russia's weapons are made in Russia. That's a much better guide to how wealthy it is in its productive capacities as an economy. Russia was the 6th largest economy in the world, I think, when this war started. It's now the 4th largest economy in the world. It overtook Japan late last year by PPP. Price purchasing power, something like that. You get a message, right? It's a different kind of way of measuring economic output to nominal GDP. And it's the world's 4th largest economy after China, the US, India. Then it's Russia. Much larger economy than Germany. It's about the size of Germany and Poland put together by PPP. But even then, that doesn't give the full story, of course, because, okay, it's a much larger economy than somewhere like Italy, but Italy's GDP is comprised of a lot of tourism, a lot of olive oil, a lot of luxury handbags, nice things, okay? They employ people, but in a war context, not that useful. Russia's economy, on the other hand, is built on primary materials, hydrocarbons, and manufacture, right? They make quite a lot of stuff, actually. So Russia economically has done pretty well out of this war. That's all the more remarkable when you think about the Jeremiads, the prophecies at the start of the conflict about how Putin had destroyed Russia's economy for good. I believed all that, by the way. I defer to really smart people, and they are very smart people, some on the left, I remember listening to a great Adam Tooze podcast about how these were the harshest ever sanctions the Russian economy would, he didn't use the word collapse because he's not like that, he's not hyperbolic, but Russian economy would suffer. And it kind of hasn't. And that has shocked, I think, everybody, left, right, center, doesn't matter. Those sanctions haven't had the impact people expected. Not just that, but in the short term, the military Keynesianism that the country has adopted, it's, transitioned loads of parts of its economy, particularly its industrial sectors, over to arms production, that has actually given it a boost. Now, a critic will say that's just short term, you can't do that forever. That's true. But right now, in early 2025, the Russian economy has done pretty well out of this 2.5 year, or 2 year, just over 2 year now, conflict. Done pretty well. And just to go back to what you said a moment ago, Kieran, Putin doesn't want to stop this war, and yet we've heard from the commentariat for the last 2 years, this is an awful war for Putin. He's on the verge of collapse. He's got cancer. He's about to die. It's all over. Regime change in Russia. Moscow has fallen. All this stuff. He doesn't want to stop the war because it's going quite well for him. It's going quite well. Yeah, the early days were not what was expected from the side of Moscow. But since then, it's going quite well for the reasons we just outlined. Political capital, economy doing well. Actually annexing now quite a lot of land. And the Hail Mary, of course, was the Trump presidency. That's the Hail Mary as far as Putin is concerned. Kieran, what does this mean for the possibility of UK, French, Dutch, Italian troops in Ukraine? Do you think that sort of talking point, which was in circulation just a few weeks ago, has now just been rendered completely moot?
I mean, let's see. But I suspect that it won't happen. I strongly suspect that it won't happen. And I think that that's probably a very bad thing for Keir Starmer, but not for very many other people. I mean, I've said on this show a number of times that I have contempt for Keir Starmer for many things. I know that's not unique on Novara, of course, or among Novara listeners and watchers. I have contempt for him across many areas, but I think his attempt to restyle himself as a kind of Churchillian figure, of course, indulged by the likes of The Economist, which put that ridiculous cartoon of him in sort of styled as Churchill on its front cover recently. His attempts to do that using Ukrainian lives as bargaining chips and Russian lives, it has to be said, I thought was the most contemptible thing he's done yet, actually. And I'll be extremely happy if there is a genuine and lasting peace that emerges from these talks, from these negotiations. It will be long overdue, but I'll, as a sort of secondary, I'll find a secondary boost in Keir Starmer losing what he thought was his way back to electoral credibility.
Bad news on the economy, everyone. The country's GDP, that's all the goods in circulation, as well as services, shrank by 0.1% in January. Economists polled by Reuters had predicted a 0.1% increase, which isn't much different. And of course, the economy grew by 0.4% in December. Now, personally, I don't care that much about monthly data. You need to look at this stuff every quarter. Just take a step back. And even then, of course, it's subject to revision all of the time. But what this data emphatically does mean is that the one thing this Labour government wants to be judged by, growth, well, that isn't happening. Indeed, given population growth, we are, and have been for several years, in a per capita recession. That is to say, output per person is going down. In the most meaningful sense, we as a country are getting poorer. Because according to the basic principles of liberal economics, higher productivity is a good thing, not least because it means higher wages. And higher wages without higher productivity means something really strange is going on. Now, it's important to say this isn't all Labour's fault. The UK has had stagnant productivity for 18 years. The amount of stuff we make per hour worked has barely moved. Hence, GDP has barely moved. No productivity growth, no growth. No growth, and without higher taxes, diminishing public services. The good thing about growth, as New Labour discovered, is you can improve things like the NHS without taxing the rich, which of course is rather appealing to the rich. And now Keir Starmer and this Labour government wants something similar to happen in 2025. Makes their life quite easy, doesn't it? We can give goodies to the NHS and not hit wealthy people who might be donors to us, after all. Except, so far, that isn't happening. Here's Chancellor Rachel Reeves speaking to the BBC earlier today.
This government is determined to turn around the poor performance of more than a decade when it comes to growth. And we need to go further and faster in growing our economy, in ensuring that we boost our national security and defence, and reforming our public services. That's why the Prime Minister set out yesterday reforms to regulation. That's why this week we've introduced the Planning and Infrastructure Bill to get Britain building again. But we must go further and faster to boost living standards and grow our economy.
The bet of this government is, as I've said, growth, because that will mean they can spend more on public services. But without growth, they can't. And in fact, they'll have to start cutting services instead, hence why the $6 billion in cuts to welfare spending was recently announced. Indeed, growth has largely stalled since May, and that's going to hit tax revenues. And don't forget, of course, the context to all of this before is that before the last general election, the UK was doing pretty well. We were rebounding from a technical recession at the start of 2024. People were optimistic after July. And yet in October, the Office for Budget Responsibility forecast 2% economic growth for 2025. That was double the 1% predicted by economists polled by Reuters. That now looks rather ambitious. The OBR is expected to release a new forecast alongside its spring statement very soon, and it's more likely to be closer to that Reuters figure, but I suspect even that's rather high. If growth, in any case, is now projected to be 1% or less, we're going to have to see a lot more cuts, or indeed tax increases, but let's be honest, it's going to be cuts. That's led to significant divisions inside the cabinet. That's covered by the Financial Times today. The Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper and Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood raised concerns about the UK government's looming spending review at a, quote, tense cabinet session on Tuesday. People with knowledge of the meeting said, according to one of the people, a large minority of Prime Minister Keir Starmer's cabinet, that's the ministers, etc., more than 25 of them, protested about planned spending reductions in their own departments. Some also raised worries about plans for up to £6 billion of welfare cuts expected to be set out next week. That's such a fascinating piece. I really recommend reading it. I do like the FT. I'm not a big fan of their Westminster coverage, but this one was an exception. That piece goes on to say that Energy Secretary Ed Miliband and Leader of the House of Commons Lucy Powell also raised concerns over the cuts. The Chancellor's spending review, which concludes in June, will determine 3 years of departmental spending going forward, as Rachel Reeves looks for savings to make her sums add up. Unprotected departments include environment, local government and justice. They will be asked to model real terms cuts of up to 11%. But it's not austerity, people. Just a reminder, local government has already seen cuts of 40+% since 2010. At yesterday's cabinet meeting, which was attended by 27 senior ministers, some present allegedly questioned whether taxes could be raised again as an alternative to spending cuts. Maybe they've been watching Gary Stevenson, maybe even Novara Media. Of course, this all comes after plans to halve the international aid budget, as well as cuts to pensioners' winter fuel payments and scrapping the £2 cap on bus fares. Number 10 are very worried, said a Labour MP. There's a sense that they may row back. They didn't get the strength of feeling, but they do now. People are worried they might lose their seats. And look, let's be real, that's all politicians really care about. Yeah, that's the ideology. Keep my seatism. No shit. You guys are polling in the mid-20s. The mid-20s, you got 32. Let's say you get 25. That's quite a big fall. The party that promised to end austerity is doing more of it. So yes, some of you may lose your seats. According to that article, one of those present said Rayner had raised MPs' worries about the depth of the cuts to the benefit system, which include reforms that even the former Conservative government refused to undertake during austerity. So Starmer says this is not austerity, and yet he's overseeing cuts that even David Cameron didn't do. Rayner is also allegedly concerned that the spending review could hamper plans to increase house building, including social housing, of course, one of this government's core aims. Meanwhile, Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, argued that the spending squeeze would be tough for the Ministry of Justice, which, of course, she's in charge of, which has experienced 15 years of budget cuts and oversees a prison estate almost at full capacity. And meanwhile, Yvette Cooper questioned whether further tightening to the Home Office's operations could undermine the government's priorities of ensuring safer streets and secure borders. Of course, she's in charge of policing, and yet they may be getting less money than before. That said, Reeves and Starmer do have their defenders. Here's the FT again. David Lammy, a Foreign Secretary, told colleagues that the concerns expressed by Mahmood and Cooper should be taken seriously, but he also supported Reeves' drive for fiscal discipline, arguing that Labour governments have historically lost when they spend too much money. Peter Kyle, Science Secretary, defended the leadership's austere approach, only to be interrupted by Powell, according to those familiar with the discussion. That is a wild excerpt. David Lammy, if we spend too much money, we'll lose. How about let's take that statement, that proposition, to its conclusion. The less money we spend, the more popular we'll be. With these guys in the cabinet, is it any wonder they're polling at 23, 24, 25%? I'm being serious. Think about this. You've just had a defense spending commitment increase. Huge amounts of money now going into defense. An extra 6 billion, I think, from God knows where, plus an extra 6-7 billion from aid. They're going to move it from 2.3% of GDP to about 3% of GDP. You're looking overall about 15 billion extra being spent on defense. We do that. People love it. We have to do it. When it comes to all those things just talked about, transport, local government, policing, whatever, courts, prisons, whatever. We can't spend too much money. People won't like it. We'll lose. But we can spend infinity money on aircraft carriers that never work and F-35s. By the way, did I mention that David Lammy studied in the United States? Anyway, just a little tinfoil theory of mine. The bickering in government isn't just limited to the cabinet. It also appears that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor are divided on the cause of the country's economic sclerosis. Number 10 slaps down Reeves for suggesting Donald Trump to blame for weak economy. Great story in The Telegraph. Of course, I'd take that with a pinch of salt. It's The Telegraph. But essentially, it's talking about the Chancellor saying that the economy isn't moving because sentiment is very, very negative and pessimistic globally because of Trump's talk on tariffs. In her defense, gold now has gone to about 3,000, I think. Gold is just so expensive now. And if you're planning on getting married, buy those wedding bands sooner rather than later. It's only going in one direction. So there's a lot of uncertainty out there. But this isn't because of Trump. Kieran, what do you make of goings on in the UK economy? And are we starting to see cracks when it comes to the cabinet? Because the honest truth is these people are going to be delivering austerity for quite a few government departments. Not all of them, not the NHS, probably not education, but for basically everywhere else, there are going to have to be cuts.
Yeah, I mean, this is just so painful to have to. It's like watching a daddy longlegs trying to escape a particularly deep bathtub or something, listening to all of this. The key problem is the way in which existing resources are being distributed. So we can have lots of growth, but as long as there is extreme, which we don't have, by the way, we can have lots of growth, but as long as there is extreme inequality, it doesn't actually mean a great deal for people's day-to-day material lives. You know, Labour, like the Tories before them, are either utterly enchanted or utterly terrified by the rich, or both. They're too afraid to tap into the ample resources kept as private loot by a domestic oligarchy that is just getting richer and richer and richer. And because of that timidity, Labour is asking every wrong question, right? It's barking up every wrong tree. It's picking on every vulnerable cohort it possibly can to raise funds. Most recently, of course, people claiming disability benefit. And all in the name of what? 1% growth at best. It is utterly risible, Aaron. It really, really is. You don't even have to be a radical socialist. I'm proud to be a radical socialist, but you don't even have to be a radical socialist to think, to dream up ways in which they could raise tens of billions, which could then be reinvested in a way that would raise productivity and growth much more significantly than they've managed so far. That's for sure. Simple things, bringing capital gains tax in line with income tax, windfall taxes on huge players in industries that have reaped massive profits. Simple things like that would, of course, cause consternation among the right-wing media, but if invested properly, would quickly boost the economy and achieve the kind of growth that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves are apparently only capable of paying desperate lip service to.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There are so many paths available here. And by the way, I think the increase on national insurance contributions for employers was stupid. Worse still, actually, the threshold being reduced from 9,000 to 5,000. So you have a part-time employee. Previously, that cost wasn't there for you as an employer. That's now a cost. I think it was really stupid. Lots of people will lose their jobs because of that. They have lost their jobs because of that. But then you look at something like capital gains, which I agree, Kieran, should be higher. To be fair to this government, they have increased it. It should be higher. But you only pay capital gains on second properties, right? If you have a house, let's say you bought a house in Battersea in the 1970s for £30,000 and you just sold it for $2 million, you should pay tax on that. Significant tax. My wife and I bought a house in 2020, very cheap because it was the perfect moment with regards to COVID. Well, very cheap, comparatively cheap. It's gone up in value. We haven't worked for that. We haven't worked for that. Tax me on it. And the crazy thing from the intergenerational perspective on all of this, and of course, not everybody who's older owns a property, but they're statistically quite likely to. About 70% of retirees have mortgages which have been paid off. I think more than 70%, actually, about 75%. They have a very overinflated asset, massively inflated asset, which they're not going to pay tax on when they sell it. And we've got the triple lock on pensions, which means that as a percentage of overall government spending, more and more each year is going out to pensioners. Now, you might say, well, we'll keep the triple lock. Then you're going to have to increase some kind of taxes on these assets that older people tend to have. The idea that they get both, and we have struggling people in the working age population who work their socks off in London and they're paying £1,500 a month rent and they're never going to get on the property ladder. They can't save. They certainly don't have enough money to have a child. They certainly don't have enough money to look after their parents if something bad happens to them. Come on. It's not serious. It's not a serious way to run a country. So there's a ton of money that can be grabbed out there. It doesn't have to be, even tax the billionaire. You don't even have to go that far. These incredibly valuable assets that the majority of the population still has make them a ton of money. It's really core to asset inequality in this country. Start taxing the increase in material wealth people have from owning property. I say that as somebody who owns a house, a terraced house in Portsmouth, okay? I'm not one of the 1%. But I'll be honest, by the way, 2 months after moving into a property, I'd rented 15 places in 15 years in London. 2 months. I remember standing there talking to my wife and saying, Charlotte, I feel so different. I feel so light, so relieved. Because I was out of that rat race, the rental rat race. And I honestly think not enough politicians, not enough members of the media political class understand what that rat race is doing to people in this country. They don't know. In case Rachel Reeves wasn't in enough hot water already, Giftgate is back in the headlines. The iPaper has revealed that the Chancellor accepted free tickets to a Sabrina Carpenter gig in a corporate box, no less. She attended the gig last weekend, so not 6 months ago, last weekend, as cabinet members raised concerns about cuts in her upcoming spending review. On who might have paid for those tickets, the article in the Eye says this. The O2 Arena and box used by the Chancellor are owned by AEG, a former client of lobbying firm FTI Consulting. According to an official register, FTI Consulting's clients have included tobacco and vaping company JTI, North Sea oil and gas operator Ithaca Energy, alongside high street banks HSBC and Lloyds. I mean, HSBC is not just a high street bank, it's a huge bank, one of the world's biggest banks. A lobbying industry source claimed the box is sometimes used by FTI Consulting, although it is unclear if staff from the firm were present in this instance. Utterly extraordinary. First of all, Rachel Reeves, I think, is 46. Does she know any Sabrina Carpenter? Really? I'm 41. I know Sabrina Carpenter. I see her on Instagram or whatever. I'm too old. I'm like a boomer. Okay, I have no idea. I'm like a mini boomer. Who is Sabrina Carpenter? I don't know her songs. Why does the Chancellor of this country go to Sabrina Carpenter concerts would be one question. Ultimately, it's a free country. Do what you like. Why is she going for nothing? Corporate hospitality, and by the way, there's no such thing as a free lunch, while we're seeing incredible cuts being touted to welfare spending, like I say, local government, prisons, policing, everything. Everything is being cut except education and healthcare and defense. Everything's being cut. Really bad time to be a cabinet minister right now. That's why they're all in, revolts, apart from David Lammy and Peter Kyle, the little nodding cats of the Labour right. But apart from them, everybody's up in arms. You're overseeing austerity 2.0 and you're going to Sabrina Carpenter gigs for free. Kieran, what do you make of this? I cannot get my head around the idea that these people still don't understand how bad this looks. And I don't like the whole, it's not a good look thing, but like it's really not a good look. Like you and your husband earn between you around £300,000 a year. You don't have to pay for a ton of stuff because you get, looked after by the taxpayer. You get a great pension. And even then, you can't pay for tickets to a concert? Really?
Yeah, just pay for the fucking tickets. It's as simple as that. We discussed this before, Aaron. I'm a few years younger than you, 37. I had no idea who Sabrina Carpenter was. That's obviously not the focus of this story, but this whole thing made me feel very old indeed. I then checked her out on Spotify and she's got 70 million listens per month. So I'm the Be Left Behind in Winter this time, and I'm in the wrong apparently. 70 million Sabrina Carter fans can't be wrong. One of whom is apparently Rachel Reeves, somebody with more innovations on their CV than The Great Gatsby. We've discussed that before. Look, there's a serious point here. Yes, buy your own fucking tickets. You're rich enough. But also, we touched on this in relation to sleaze and the proximity of politicians to corporations and, powerful lobbyists and so on. And it might just appear to some people, I don't imagine Novara listeners or viewers, but it might appear to some people like, oh, they're just free tickets. But it is the thin end of the wedge, I'm sure. And there is a serious problem here. Again, if perhaps this were totally incongruous with the rest of the operations of the modern Labour Party under Keir Starmer. In other words, if it were that this was, a government for the people, by the people, of the people, and was taking from the rich to invest in public services in a way that was incurring the wrath of the mainstream right-wing media, and then the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who is a kind of Robin Hood figure, claims free tickets to Sabrina Carpenter, would we care? I wouldn't care, actually. But that's not the situation we're in, is it? That's not the context we're in. We're in a context where it's very clear that the Labour Party kowtows and tugs its forelock at big, powerful business interests. And, the sort of the thin end of that wedge is that they then accept freebies from those kinds of people to go to things as asinine as Sabrina Carpenter gigs. Pace, no offense to Sabrina Carpenter fans.
Broadcaster Sangita Myska was mysteriously axed from her LBC show last year. And while she's never explained why she was let go, there's been plenty of speculation that it was over one particular interaction with the guest. Just days after Iran launched a retaliatory airstrike on Israel last April, Israeli spokesman Avi Hyman appeared on Myska's show when this happened.
What Israel did by taking that action against Iran was escalate to what is already an incredibly fragile situation, didn't it?
Sangita, that's an outrageous framing of the reality.
It's not an outrageous framing. I've just been speaking to somebody who is a diplomat to Iran from the UK government. That's not an outrageous framing of it. What Israel did was strike what is considered in diplomatic circles the sovereign territory of Iran, whether we like it or not. No. And there was undoubtedly going to be a blowback. So did Israel game out what was going to happen next?
Firstly, I'm not going to speak directly to that strike. What I can say definitively, and this is why it's outrageous, I can say definitively is that wasn't an embassy, it wasn't a consulate, it wasn't any type of diplomatic mission.
It's been widely reported as that.
Because that's what Iran says. Because that's what Iran says. So would you like to copy and paste?
Are you suggesting every single news organization in the world has got that wrong?
Why do we take these psychos so seriously? Why do we take those psychos so seriously? I mean, I know people watching this show don't. Much of the media does, right? Which is the heart of this story. But far from being outrageous, what Sangita Myska was doing there, her framing of that situation was completely correct. Yet just a few days after the show aired, Myska quietly disappeared from the airwaves, leading to a public outcry. 25,000 people signed a petition to reinstate Sangita Myska at LBC, and over 100 media personalities signed an open letter in support of the broadcaster. She was hugely popular, by the way, before this all kicked off. And Myska has never revealed why LBC cancelled her show, but many suspect it was because she went a little too hard on Israel. How dare you hold a politician accountable or talk about trying to at least adhere to international law? But now her former colleague, James O'Brien, has decided that he wants to set the record straight.
What happened to Sangita, even at LBC? No,
that's just Rolex, mate. And I mean, you can say it because you've got free speech, but that's just crap.
Thank you.
All right. We all sit in. I'll tell you something because it bores me rigid. This, and I can't believe that certain people have allowed this lie to be perpetuated. We sit in a room every 3 months. Every single person that works here, we sit in a room every 3 months. They show us graphs of how our program is performing. Right? Everybody knows when someone's vulnerable. And it's not the graph of what audience you inherit when you come on air. It's a graph of how your audience falls or rises during the duration of your program. Every single person in this building sits in that room and watches a graph for every single program every 3 months. All right?
I don't want to get off topic.
No, you said it. You can't backtrack now, mate. You have decided you have decided to believe something that isn't true, and the only person that can prove to you that it isn't true has decided to stay silent and allow people like you to believe slurs and anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about her former colleagues. So
I didn't make an anti-Semitic slur or anything.
Yes, you are. You're claiming that someone has been censored or silenced when they haven't.
But that's not anti-Semitic. How's that anti-Semitic? That in itself is what's wrong with everything.
Okay, mate. I am setting the record straight on something, okay? And the idea that somebody would be silenced for being critical of Israel during a phone-in that is heavily critical of Israel is palpably absurd. You can dispute the fact that it's anti-Semitic. That's my opinion. And that is my freedom of speech that I am exercising, just as you are exercising yours. But if you choose to come on this program and tell lies about every single one of my colleagues, I will push back, okay? And that is what you are doing. I sympathize with you because the lies have been deliberately allowed to fester by somebody who can only answer for their own conduct. But it is lies.
I've watched that a few times, and just watching it again, I was blaspheming, obviously. Obviously, I'm sure you were too. Now, two things there. First, James O'Brien is accusing his caller of anti-Semitism for suggesting Sangita Myska might have fallen victim to the Israel lobby. He kind of backtracks a little bit, but he used that word. Apparently, it's a racist conspiracy to speculate that Israel has any influence over the British media. Well, guess what? Remember when the Israeli ambassador lobbied the BBC to put its documentary Gaza, How to Survive a War? Maybe, James O'Brien, that was an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory too. Or how about the time Britain's oldest Jewish newspaper, the Jewish Chronicle, was caught literally publishing fake Israeli intelligence fabrications that were part of a pro-Benjamin Netanyahu propaganda campaign. Presumably, I'm anti-Semitic. I'm a conspiracy theorist for mentioning that. Then there was that time, even before Israel's genocide in Gaza, that the BBC removed a series of documentaries for kids on Palestine and the Israeli occupation. Why? Because pressure group UK Lawyers for Israel didn't like them. Clues in the name. They're a lobby group that wants to advance the interests of Israel. It's called the Israel Lobby. If you want to know more about the Israel Lobby, because yes, it really does exist on both sides of the Atlantic, then you should stop listening to James O'Brien, stop losing those brain cells, and come instead to our next Novara Media IRL event. That's because I'll be talking to the man who literally wrote the book on how Israel manipulates the Western media. He wrote a tremendous history of the Israel lobby. That's on Monday, the 7th of April at 6:30 p.m. It'll be taking place at Earth, that's the venue, in Hackney, North London. I'd love to see you there. The link for that is in the description below. You can buy tickets. Don't just buy one for yourself, buy one for a friend as well. Elan is sensational. If you're not sure about him, you've never heard of him before, after you finish watching the show tonight, just type into YouTube, Novara Media, Elan Pape. We've done 2 interviews with him. One's got more than 1 million views. That is about his book on the history of the Israel lobby. Tremendous historian, tremendously intelligent man. My goodness, chalk and cheese with James O'Brien. Let's go back to James O'Brien. My second point about that James O'Brien clip is that in it, he blames Sangita Myska for remaining silent and allowing what he calls a lie to fester. Look, in my opinion, there is no way on God's earth that James O'Brien doesn't know that Myska will have been forced to sign an NDA. That's a non-disclosure agreement banning her from speaking out. Even if O'Brien is right about why she left LBC, which, by the way, I don't believe, you have some kind of assessment a few days after something like that, and then you go, no, I don't believe you, sorry. There will almost certainly be an NDA in place, and O'Brien knows this. So he's being a little bit short with the truth, shall we say, which is why I'm not particularly charitable about the rest of what he's divulging in that clip. So what he's doing there is holding Myska responsible for the allegations against LBC, probably knowing full well she can't answer back. Well, Sangita Myska does seem to have found a way of answering in her own manner. Just hours after that rant from O'Brien, Sangita Myska reposted this tweet. A huge thank you to Lou Haig for bringing the issue of NDAs and their horrific misuse front and centre in the House of Commons today. Why is it that parliamentary privilege should have to be used to expose the wrongdoing of organisations? So parliamentary privilege means that people in the House of Commons, I think laws as well, can say things that otherwise would fall to all kinds of lawfare. Basically, parliamentarians have very enhanced rights to free speech that the rest of us don't enjoy. It was posted by anti-NDA campaign group Can't Buy My Silence earlier this week, and it's about the horrific misuse of NDAs being brought up in the House of Commons. And in apparent response to O'Brien's diatribe, Sangita Myska also posted this over on Instagram. Dignity doesn't just mean always being stiff and composed. It means a belief in oneself, that one is worthy of the best. Dignity means that what I have to say is important. I will say it when it's important for me to say it. Dignity really means that I deserve the best treatment I can receive and that I have the responsibility to give the best treatment I can to other people. That's from African-American poet Maya Angelou. Kieran, what did you make of that clip from James O'Brien?
Well, first of all, let's highlight the fact that Sangita was replaced with none other than Vanessa Feltz. Vanessa Feltz, for those who don't know, is a card-carrying Zionist, unapologetic Zionist, and has uttered some extremely, let's call them what they are, racist things about Palestinians and the necessary separation of Palestinians and Israelis in Israeli society. So James O'Brien can kick off all he likes. He can throw all the dummies out of all the prams that he likes. But I think that's a huge piece of evidence in and of itself. What else did I make of it? Well, I mean, you've already covered this, Aaron, in some detail. But I do think I just want to quickly run over a couple of things regarding the Israel lobby. There is, make no mistake, a highly organized and powerful lobby that works very diligently in the UK and in the US and many, many other countries. And it exists to serve the interests and objectives of the Israeli state. Now, there's a wide range of motivations behind it: ideological, imperialistic, geostrategic, economic, religious. But it absolutely exists. And actually, if one bothers to look, it doesn't even make a secret of the fact that it exists. For example, APEC, American Israel Public Affairs Committee in the US, and one example, UK Lawyers for Israel, which you mentioned, Aaron, here in the UK, both of which regularly boasts publicly of the anti-Palestine legislation that it's been able to impress upon the political system and the pro-Israel media coverage it has managed to impel from our fearless fourth estate. And just as a brief aside, just use a bit of personal experience. I worked in a London borough at the local authority, a large Muslim population. And after October 7th, 2023, the community felt that it ought to show solidarity with Palestine by adorning traffic lights, not obstructing them, but adorning public features, public furniture, etc., with Palestinian flags. And the local authority took the view that it was too risky to try and remove some of these, and in order to maintain community cohesion, and every single day, I mean, there wasn't a day that went by for 3 or 4 months after the flag started to appear that we didn't receive a threatening letter from UK Lawyers for Israel or the threat of a disparaging story from the Jewish Chronicle. All right. So, yeah, I just want to say as well, these lobbies might be exclusively Zionist in composition, but they are not exclusively Jewish. Few demographics imbue the Israel lobby with more power and virility than white evangelical Christians from the American heartlands. All right? I think that's a really important point to make. And the final point I just want to make is, in 2019, around the time of the second Jeremy Corbyn general election, many people, including many people on the left, became frightened to articulate these simple facts, right? Let's be honest with ourselves. As a Palestinian, I don't hold any grudge against the people who have acknowledged this. I get that if you're on the left, especially if you're on the left, and you're accused of racism by a very powerful, highly organized, as I say, lobby, it's a terrifying thing. But I get that. But no more. There's a genocide ongoing, and there are people who are paid to ensure that it continues. So we all have a duty, and I think most people on the left acknowledge this now. We all have a duty to call a spade, and an Israel lobby.
Yeah, wild. I genuinely thought we'd gone past this, right? Seeing O'Brien call that guy anti-Semitic. Did he call him anti-Semitic, or did he say he was saying something anti-Semitic? Because he's saying that there's an Israel lobby? Really? There is an Israel lobby. There is. There's a very large one. One of the most senior Israel lobbyists in this country is now a member of the Labour Parliamentary Party, Luke Akehurst. I really don't know. I mean, and also, look, here's the thing. This is basic journalism. Nick Davies, who writes for The Guardian, used to write a lot more for The Guardian. He's a bit older now. He wrote a great book a few years ago called Flat Earth News. I recommend it to everybody watching. Read this if you want a little bit of an insight into how the contemporary media works. Flat Earth News, he talks about how the Israel lobby seeks to police the acceptable boundaries of discourse when it comes to Israel-Palestine. And they use an approach he calls the electric fence approach. So every time you report on something that Israel's done, which is bad, or you do a positive story about Palestine or Palestinians, they get out the electric fence. You get the emails, you get the the letter campaigns. Somebody sends a message to your line manager. You get the social media harassment. You get people coming to your organization. And he talks about this in the context, for instance, of the BBC. The BBC has a really high threshold for criticizing Israel or doing a positive story about Palestine because they know the response they're going to get, hence the electric fence. You touch it, you pull away. You do a positive story about Palestine, it's just not worth it. Is it going to get a big audience? Is it really that important a story? We know we're going to get so many downsides. We're going to get so many costs. It's all about incentives, disincentives. That is coordinated in a very professional, expert way by the lobby. And Kieran, you said about actually that just because it's an Israel lobby doesn't mean it's a Jewish lobby, that is anti-Semitic if you start talking like that. This is really important. Evangelical Christians are the people that started the Zionist lobby in the United States. They literally started it. Again, if you want to know more about that, then come to our event on the 7th of April with me and Ilan Pape at Earth in Hackney. He talks about all of this in his fabulous book. I really recommend reading it. It's 600 pages. So. Kieran, thanks for joining me tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I said Friday night, anything could happen. Anything did.
We went there. We spent about 20 minutes talking about the Israel lobby. And thanks, of course, for everyone tuning in. Hope you have a great weekend. Come back on Monday for another live show at 6 p.m. Until then, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.